All right, folks. Well, it's Healthcare Unfiltered, and I'm really very excited today because not only I'm hosting an amazing leader in the healthcare industry, but she's a first timer on Healthcare Unfiltered. We always like first timers on Healthcare Unfiltered because we like to bring them back after 6 months to a year to see how progress is going. Just as a
Thank you so
start,
much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it,
we're very
Chatty.
happy to have you, Dina. I've actually titled this podcast episode as I was thinking what we're going to talk about is changing the blood lab industry or the blood
Hmm.
diagnostic industry. But we'll get to
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Maybe just tell us a little bit about you, your,
Sure.
initial involvement and scientific upbringing.
Sure. So my name is Dena Marrinucci. I am originally from New Hampshire, and I got my undergraduate degree in chemistry at the University of Vermont. And while I was in my undergraduate studies, I was really focused on just chemistry and, being the best that I could be and getting the best grades. And I got to my senior year and I knew that I went into the scientific field to help people, but then I wasn't actually sure what the next step was. And so when I got to my senior year, I realized that, the pre-med path really wasn't for me because I hadn't taken enough of the biology and sort of other requirement courses, just because I had focused mostly on analytical chemistry during my tenure at UVM. And two, that I really wanted to have an impact, a profound impact in terms of prolonging people's lives. And it was really challenging to figure out, how do I do that with my scientific background? And so I ended up deciding to go to graduate school. And I selected the Scripps Research Institute here in San Diego to do my graduate studies. And one of the reasons I selected Scripps was because I could come in as a chemist, but join any one of the 200 plus labs that they had. And so I thought that was a great opportunity for me, to learn more biology, to learn more medical applications, and to work on new technologies that would have a medical impact. And so when I got to Scripps, there was a particular professor that I was really eager to join his lab. And, I had interviewed with him, I had engaged with him through email, and he said, I only take one grad student. And so if you want to join my lab, you have to come out the summer before your first year. And whoever comes first, I'll accept. And so I graduated UVM. I took 3 weeks and I went to Italy with my best friend and our boyfriends at the time, and just for 3 weeks. And then I packed my bags and I moved out to San Diego and I showed up at this individual's lab and he said I was 3 days too late. Um,
No.
Yep, he had already accepted a grad student and he apologized to me and he said, you're first on the list for October because the
Yeah.
graduate rotations were a certain amount of time. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I literally packed my bags, flew out to San Diego. School doesn't start for several months. I don't know a soul. What am I going to do? And so I started just scouring the Scripps website and looking for PIs that I could just spend some time with. And then my plan was in October to join his lab. But, my mom always, tells me, things happen for a reason. And in this case, I came across a professor's website. His name is Peter Kuhn, Kuhn, and he was new to the Scripps faculty from Stanford. And one of his initiatives was to develop medical innovations, solving an unmet medical need. And so it took me about, this is pre-chat GPT, it took me about 30 minutes to write him like a very formal email, telling him about my background and why I wanted to join his lab.
I love how you weaved in this pre-chat GPT thing. It's like tongue in cheek for those
You
who are
have to,
listening. If
right?
you're using chat
I'm just
GPT,
bringing you back to those times because some of our listeners may not recall
yeah.
pre smartphones, guys. And so, anyways, I hit the send button and I was like, well, we'll see what happens. I'll check tomorrow. And literally 3 seconds later, I had a response from him, ping, and he said, stop by. That's all he said. And so I did. And I sat in a conference room with him and he whiteboarded, 3 ideas that he had. one of which was a rare cell detector for cancer. And I know this is a field that you're
Yeah.
very close
Yeah.
and an expert in. And that was really resonant to me. And he talked about some other ideas that he had. And I kept going back to the rare cell project. And he said, "Are you sure you want to do that? We've not even started. I don't even have a wet lab." Like, he was trying to guide me towards some other projects. And I was like, "No, I really want to do the cancer project." And so that was the beginning of my graduate studies, was really that. And he had said to me in that conversation, if we're successful and if we develop this technology, the only way that we're going to be able to help patients is by commercializing whatever technology it is that we developed. And I had no idea what that meant at the time, but I was like, huh. So that was sort of my introduction into entrepreneurism.
So, but the technology that you were working on in the lab, in
Hmm.
your graduate studies
Hmm.
were for cancer early detection? Is that what it was? Like a liquid biopsy type of thing?
Yes, it was a liquid biopsy technology to identify and profile rare cells, so circulating tumor cells in
Hmm.
the blood. And so this was one of the first circulating tumor cell liquid biopsy technologies. And we worked with Scripps Clinic and other collaborators to develop this technology. And about sort of 5 years into the development of the technology, we spun it out of Scripps and into a company called Epic. And I left academia and Peter stayed in academia to develop, the next things. And that was my first experience in a startup.
So you ran Epic. Were you the like the CEO or like one of the,
Yeah,
or
so
you
I
founder?
started, so there was three of us that sort of kind of came together as sort of the founding team to start the company. So we had a CEO, I was the head of pharma partnerships, and then we had another individual that was sort of helping us on the technology side. And so my remit was really to establish partnerships with pharma to really understand like what their needs were in terms of monitoring biomarkers in clinical trials and understanding the unmet need for targeted therapeutics in oncology. And so I worked on establishing partnerships with
Hmm.
pharma and biotech, integrating our technology in over 100 clinical trials worldwide over the next kind of 5 to 6 years
That's
that I was at
amazing.
the company. Yeah.
So what happened to Epic? What was the that what was
Yeah,
what happened after that?
so we integrated, this technology into a lot of clinical trials for exploratory biomarker analysis, and used a lot of the pharma expertise to develop our own independent test. And so we developed an independent prostate cancer test that was detection as well as profiling these cancer cells for ARV7. And that product helped oncologists to identify, what therapeutic to give their metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer patients. Um, and so if you had the variant, then you wouldn't respond to androgen therapies. And so getting that test and having those results, help the oncologist figure out, oh, maybe we need to give this patient, an ARV7 targeted therapeutic. And so we launched that in 2015, and that was picked up by Genomic Health, now Exact, and they commercialized that test. But as part of that work, I spoke to a lot of oncologists and patients and about our technology and about the testing. And one of the common themes was, we really love this test, but, for us, we need results on site. We need results faster so that we can make decisions to help better care for our patients. And, with the Epic technology and a lot of other technologies out there, you collect the blood sample and then you send it out to the central lab, Epic in this example, and we process, the sample and we do all of our analyses and then we issue the results back. And that can be weeks later,
Right.
depending on what it is that you're doing and how sophisticated
Hmm.
the profiling is of the tumor. And so that sort of piqued my interest in terms of, there is this need for near patient testing. And that was sort of the initial sort of feedback that I was hearing, which was a motivation for Truvian, which is the company I'm at
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Amazing. So you sold Epic or was it acquired by Genomic Health? Is that what happened?
No, just that test was
Okay.
launched and commercialized by Genomic Health. Yes.
Genomic Health. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
then, yeah,
yep.
go ahead.
And so then, one of my investors from Epic had said to me around the same time, "Hey, I was approached by a couple of founders of a company called Eco ATM. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's a
Have
San
not.
Diego-based company.
Hmm.
It's totally outside of healthcare, but what they developed is a kiosk that recycles electronic waste. And so it's a big green kiosk that sits in the front of, grocery stores and
Hmm.
retailers, just right next to like Coinstar. And you remember the DVD
Right.
kiosk there? There's a green one and it's called Eco ATM. And so basically what you do is you would take your cell phone, hook it up to this kiosk. It would run a diagnostic on the cell phone and issue cash and recycle those parts. And so
Nice.
while while these founders of Eco ATM were forging relationships with retail, what they were hearing, this is kind of in 2013 timeframe, just
Hmm.
so that you understand the timeframe. But they were hearing from these retail partners that, oh my gosh, we love automation, we love kiosks, and we're going into healthcare. Is there anything that you can automate on the blood testing side? So they were probably hearing the same things that Elizabeth Holmes was hearing during that time frame about retail going into healthcare and really wanting to solve some of the
Yeah.
existing pain points that exist in blood testing. And so they went to a friend of mine, an investor in my first company, Kim Kamdar from Domain Associates, which is one of the largest and oldest healthcare funds in the US. And she was talking to them about what they were hearing. And she was like, well, why don't you develop something to solve this problem?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we're just, the tech portion, and we've never done diagnostics or life sciences. And so she called me and some of my other co-founders, and we came together to start Truvian. And that was in 2015.
So your goal of Truvian, I mean,
Mhm.
is it how much, I mean, so you obviously identified there's a problem.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's a problem versus a need. You just wanted to change maybe the way blood testing is being done, I guess.
Yes.
Um,
We want to make it simple. We want
yeah,
to remove
yeah,
some of those friction points and make it
yeah,
more convenient, more accessible,
yeah,
and then at the end of the day, more actionable so that we can make timely decisions with our patients
right,
about what this information means and what they need to do
right.
to improve their overall health trajectory.
How did you find your co-founders? Were they friends of yours that you knew? Were the investors identifying them? And the reason I ask is because we know there's some level of chemistry should exist between the co-founders because frankly, there will be obstacles in every
Yeah.
road and you have to have each other's back. So did you know your
Yeah.
co-founders before? How did this come
No,
along?
well, I knew Kim Kamdar, who was the partner at Domain Associates, the VC firm, and she was really the glue that brought us all together. But I had known her since I was in graduate school because she had invested in the liquid biopsy company, and her and I took more operating roles in sort of like the company creation, and then my other co-founders, who are wonderful, they really helped us put the company together and had some of the technology ideas. And one of my co-founders had the initial beginnings of the optical system that you see behind me, that kind of evolved over the last 9 years. But yeah, that's how it started. But yeah, we all had a similar vision for what it was we wanted to do, and that was really to impact patients,
Right,
like to
right.
develop a technology that would solve a problem, which is the whole blood testing paradigm is broken and there's so many friction points. And
So
if
give
we
us the
could,
problem. Tell us the problem. Like
yeah,
if
yeah,
you, because all you have to have a solution.
yep,
I think for those who are listening, I go to the doctor, get my blood test, and wait
yeah,
for the results. Yes, I would like to have my results in 1 hour, but
yeah,
goodness, I'll wait a couple of days if I have to. It is where it is.
yeah.
What is the problem?
Well, yes. So a lot of people, so there's, this big epidemic in the US and worldwide of chronic disease, right? And it's just increasing and increasing. And, I think 50% of American adults have at least one chronic disease, which is a very staggering statistic when you think about it, and chronic disease being preventable, one. And two, 40% of adults don't go and get their regular blood testing done. And when you start to unravel like the why, like why don't you go? It's because it's inconvenient. There's a lot of steps. It costs money. And at the end of the day, they don't know if there's value. And that last piece is because when in the story that sort of you described about how blood testing is done today, when you finally get your results, you're not with your healthcare provider. And for the lay person, it's very difficult to understand what these blood tests are, what they mean, what I need to do. And so you don't have that interaction with your physician about what these mean for me and what I need to do to improve, my overall health and any action plan that I need to take. And so that's what we wanted to solve was let's imagine a world where, these machines are, in every clinic or
Yeah.
every pharmacy, or maybe even in the future at a college campus or at a mall. And
Yeah.
you can just say, I'm going to get my, blood drawn. It goes on the machine. And then, in a matter of minutes, you have your results and you can have that conversation with your healthcare provider about those results.
Okay, let me back up just a little bit just to
Mhm.
understand. So,
Yeah.
is the idea that me as an individual, I can decide on doing blood work on my own, or is the idea that if my physician or my healthcare provider believes I need a blood work, then the process is simpler? And the reason I ask is obviously self-explanatory. I
Yep.
worry sometimes about people making decisions
Yes,
about what to
absolutely.
test and not without the supervision of a healthcare provider.
Yes. So from day one, we've always wanted to embrace the provider, and they are part of the patient's journey. Even with, a lot of the AI tools that we have, the AI tools are support for clinical decision making, but they are not the clinical decision maker.
Right.
And that's kind of how we see our product as well, is that you walk into a clinic and instead of you meeting with your doctor and your doctor saying, hey, you should get your blood drawn, and then you may or may not get your blood drawn because you might be busy and you don't see the need or the value in doing so. But if you do get your blood drawn, then you get those blood tubes. There's multiple blood tubes. They get sent out to a central lab. They get run on different analyzers. And then you get your blood test results days later while you're not with your doctor. So
Mhm.
imagine a world where you walk into the clinic and the first thing that happens is you get your blood drawn. And by the time you're with your doctor, your EMR is already updated with
Right. Point of
current
care.
labs.
You know, the point of care. I mean, so for example, there are finger sticks where you get the CBC fast. I believe there are sometimes you do other things, but we'll get to that later.
Mhm.
When you started the company was 2015.
Yep.
Um, was that the time where Theranos was your biggest competition?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting story that, I don't tell too often. But essentially, we received seed money from our investor a month before the Wall Street Journal expose. So it was a very good time and bad time. The good part was that we had received the funds
I was
and
gonna say.
a month before the Wall Street Journal expose, but those funds were to only last about 6 months to do some initial proof of concept experiments to show that, hey, we could develop a multimodal system that could displace basically what she was doing. So you have to remember back to that time, we didn't know a lot about Theranos. We knew, that what her vision was, which was to make blood testing, more accessible and, more actionable and convenient for people. And that was probably the one thing that she got right was she validated that need. Everything else, obviously we know now there was a lot of fraud and mistakes that were made along the way that really impacted people's lives. Um, But what we knew then was she had the vision. But what was happening was you could go into a Walgreens in Arizona, give your blood sample, and then the blood sample was sent out to the Palo Alto lab. And so we were like, that's not really solving the real problem. We need near patient testing. And so and we didn't know that she had tried that and it didn't work because it was very secretive. We just thought it was sort of this central lab model. And so that's why we put the company together, was to develop a near patient point of care system that would be able to be multimodal and do all the types of tests that you would want to do on site. But then a month later, the Wall Street Journal expose and, Theranos was unraveling for many, many months. And so that really impacted our development, and it impacted our ability to raise money during that time. Because, investors, for the right reasons, they were very hesitant about investing in a story that sounded so similar to one that was on, every
Right.
front
So
page of every
how do you,
newspaper.
I mean, like you said, it's fair for them to be skeptical. It's hard not to be, right? I mean, you just
Absolutely.
had like, because you're coming in with kind of the same theory, and there's one that was proven not only wrong, but deceiving to investors. So how do you navigate that kind of turmoil? Because you're trying to show that we may have same idea, but we're actually different.
Right.
Um, how do you approach that?
Yeah, so there was two things that we did from day one, which was one, surround ourselves with the right set of people that have the right set of experience to be our sort of true north, if you will. And so we surrounded ourselves with thought leaders in the laboratory medicine space from day one. And even naysayers of Theranos joined our scientific and clinical advisory board. And, all of the data that we would generate, we would have them review and give us input and feedback. And so that was one. Two is just focus on the product and product performance. And this being in your space, but point of care devices, they kind of get a bad rap because, and we saw that in the pandemic and the COVID days, is, point of care devices are considered sort of quick and dirty. And if you want the real result, you have to send out to the central lab. And we saw that in COVID where, we were doing these at-home tests, but if you wanted the real result, you had to do the PCR test. And we said, we never want to be an inferior product. What we want to do is we want to bring the core lab to the bench through this technology and provide, the same results that we expect from the core lab, but on a benchtop device. And so we just focused on the performance and taking the right steps. I always say there's no shortcuts in diagnostics. Like, it takes time. And it's taken us 9 years to get to this stage where you see the product behind me, where we finished our clinicals and we're under FDA review. And it's a very exciting time for the company. But that didn't happen overnight. It took 9 years of
Of course,
development.
of course. I mean, I could only imagine, but let me get back to the product.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure you can't share everything, but you can share certain things. Now, I recall what Theranos was trying to do is I can get you all of the information through a drop of blood. It could be like a
Yeah.
cc, like an ml.
Yep.
Is that what you're proposing? Are you proposing a drop of blood? Are you proposing a tube of blood? Are you like what are you bringing to the market? What is the FDA reviewing, I
Yes.
guess?
Yep. So let me just start by explaining this technology. So it's the first multimodal system that really brings together the multiple optical modules within one small device. And that is what allows us to do clinical chemistry, immunoassays, and hematology assays all simultaneously on the device. And so the device has a lot of breadth in its capabilities, but the first panel that we're working to get FDA clearance for, we call the comprehensive panel. It basically replaces the annual exam panel, like when you go to your doctors for your annual exam and they draw, the 3 tubes of blood and send it out to the core lab. What our panel has in it is a chemistry panel, so your metabolic panel, your lipid panel, the CBC with differential, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and then HbA1c, hemoglobin A1c for diabetes. So it's 34 tests. And no, it's not one drop, but it's 8 drops of blood. So it's 300 microliters of whole blood from a single tube for all 34 of those test results. And we can get you all 34 of those test results in just under 30 minutes on the platform. There will be future panels that you can run on the platform. So imagine an anemia panel or a cardiac panel or a men's health panel. And we'll leverage the same technology, but the chemistries that go on the disposable that I'm showing you right here will be different. We'll use the same disc, but in these microwells, there'll be different chemistries that were dispensed during our manufacturing process.
That's amazing. So you imagine this device.
Mhm.
How big is the device? I'm trying to look at the dimensions behind
Yeah,
you.
so it's about the size of a desktop computer, if we
Okay.
remember what those used
Yeah.
to look like,
Yeah.
or a benchtop printer.
Okay.
Um,
So you
and
imagine this to be in like doctors'
Mhm.
offices,
Yes,
outpatient, potentially pharmacies, I mean,
yes,
urgent care, and obviously, clearly, sometimes the metabolic panel could take hours, if not usually the next day or 2 days later, but this could happen in 30 minutes.
right.
And as an oncologist, that's actually big. I can tell you that there are many patients I cared for that I needed to know the kidney and the liver function. And before you even mix the chemotherapy,
Right,
because you can't really mix it unless you make sure that the patient's going to get it.
right,
And they will have to have the blood work done, come and do the blood work the day before sometimes, or in the morning off so they can get the treatment in the afternoon.
exactly.
So this really solves a big problem. Let me ask you this. Are there some blood, like, are you able to do everything? We'll talk about the molecular stuff later, but
Mhm.
for the, are there anything that you, like you can get everything done? You can get PSA done, you can get other things, or are there
Yes.
specific tests that you just cannot do that fast?
Um, over time, yes, over time, our whole plan is all the routine tests that are done on the central lab analyzers, we can bring to our platform. So basically, any clinical chemistry or immunoassay that is done on a central laboratory analyzer, we can bring to our platform because one of the things is this is not, using some novel way to detect these biomarkers in our blood. It's actually leveraging the same types of optical modalities that are in the larger central lab analyzers. It's just miniaturized. And so, even the chemistries, as an example, we're using off-the-shelf chemistries. We didn't want
Yeah,
to innovate there, right? Because those are tried and true.
yeah.
And they've been in existence for decades and decades. Let's leverage what is tried and true. And what we do is we buy off-the-shelf chemistries. And what we do in our manufacturing is we add excipients and stabilizers that allow us to dry down those chemistries in these little microwells.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that the benefit of that is that now you don't have wet reagents that you have to store in the refrigerator or that you have to hook up to the device. Everything that you need is in the single-use
Mhm.
consumable kit.
Mhm.
And at the end of the run, you throw this out and you can start a new run.
Okay, so interesting.
Mhm.
Um, I love the idea you could do, I mean, essentially, I mean, short of the molecular studies, because,
Yes, it does
you
not
know,
do molecular.
well, it
Yes.
can't because you have to
Yeah.
do, I mean,
Mhm.
sequencing, just there's
Yes.
certain elements in sequencing that you just can't go around. But you could do, I mean, maybe there's a way to add in the future where you can expedite certain things. I don't know how this would work, but do you ever envision that you have the capability to look into faster ways to get the molecular results?
Yeah,
Obviously not with this
so
device because that's not a sequencing device.
right. Yeah. So there's rapid molecular tests that we could actually bring on board a machine like this. We have a lot of the capabilities already baked into the system. There are some changes that we would need to make, but you could think of things like, COVID or flu or
Hmm.
strep, rapid molecular tests. Those are totally within the wheelhouse over time.
Yeah,
But the first sort of basis of the technology is the three modality, we like to call it, but it's the chemistry, the immunoassays, and the hematology
yeah,
assays.
yeah. The FDA, you submitted to get the FDA approval. What does that mean for you as a co-founder of a company? Is that the stamp of approval that you're striving for? I mean, is this the launching pin to next steps? Like, what does that mean for
Yeah.
you?
I mean, for us, sort of the pivotal moment was looking at that clinical trial data. So, as part of the 510(k) submission, the FDA submission, what we have to demonstrate is that our technology produces the same results as the central lab analyzers, our predicates. And so the way that you do those studies is you do a method comparison where you take willing participants and you draw multiple tubes of blood and you put one in the Truvian machine and then you send the other
Yeah.
tubes out to the central lab who processes them. And then you look at the results and you say, were they equivalent for all the 34 tests that are in our panel? And so, as we were, we had done a lot of independent studies. We had UCSD last year do an independent validation of the product. So we had a lot of data showing that, our performance matched the central lab analyzers. But to have that study, the clinical trial complete and being able to look at that data, very exciting for our team. Obviously, the submission is a big milestone for the company. And, now we'll be engaging with FDA and, hopefully you'll be hearing about our clearance soon.
Well, we're looking forward to this. So I gotta tell you though, as I was preparing for this, I came across a Newsweek article, Dina.
Yes,
It was published January 23rd, 2025. It's not too long ago, but I'm just
yes.
gonna read for you the title of the article. Theranos broke rules that this blood test company vows to live by. And you were interviewed as part of the article, and I thought it was very well written and very nice.
She did a great job. Yeah.
But do you think that the Theranos cloud is
Mhm.
always going to, like, you're always going to have this people have some degree of skepticism, like, even with an article that was
Mhm.
very flattering to you and your company and everything, still the top of the article was Theranos? Or do you think it's actually a good thing because it actually shows, just because one company failed, this doesn't mean that the idea is wrong. I mean, tell us a bit about
Yeah.
how you handle this.
No, it's a really good question. I think that ultimately, everybody knows the Theranos story. It was so mainstream, right? Like people outside of our field, they know Theranos. They know who Elizabeth Holmes is just because it was on the cover of every magazine and mainstream media. And people have followed that story. And so people, when we're talking about Truvian, people get what we're doing because they remember that. But to answer the first part of your question, I don't, yes, there are sometimes skeptics that, will come into our facility because we have, a lot of clinical studies ongoing and we invite, some thought leaders and really prestigious sort of, people to come in and try the technology. And sometimes there will be skeptics. But I think we've overcome that because we have so much evidence that we
Yeah.
publicly share on our website. And one of the things that, Theranos was criticized for is they never allowed their technology outside of their lab for an academic to independently validate.
Yeah.
And we achieved that last year. So we literally dropped off our devices at UCSD
Mm.
and they ran a
Yeah.
study and they presented those results at last year's ADLM, which is the big laboratory medicine conference. And so there's less people wondering about the performance. Most people now are like, okay, it does work. This product works. We've seen the data, but there's nothing like seeing your own results.
Right.
And that's always the aha moment. And in the article, I think they quoted me, I said, seeing is believing. But when you see your own blood results on the machine and that, you have high cholesterol or you have something, in your blood that's unique, and you see those same results from our machine, that's that wow factor that we still get to this day.
Yeah. Really fascinating. I mean, from a college student that the mentor said, you're 3 days too late to where you are right now. This is really amazing and fascinating story. So every time I interview anybody who started a startup, I always think, what's next, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I mean, how big is your company now? How many employees do you have?
We're about 100
Yeah,
employees. And yeah, I mean, what's next for us is obviously, the FDA review and commercialization. I mean, our goal from day one was to get this technology out to patients and providers. And
yeah.
so we're so close to that. And, it took 9 years of a lot of hard work I mean, I have the most amazing team at Truvian, honestly. I was thinking last night, this is maybe like one of those like once in a lifetime experience. Like, will I ever get to work with this caliber of talent? It's amazing because of the passion of what we're trying to accomplish and overcoming so many challenges along the journey and being the first to develop a technology like this when everyone said we couldn't.
So I
And
was really going to ask you, do you have competition right now? Because I mean, I'm not even aware of anyone who's doing this.
it's hard to know. I think there are some companies that, are working on maybe,
Maybe.
earlier phase of
Sure.
product. But I would say like our biggest competition, right, is maybe the central labs. Um, because if, our devices in clinics, some of that testing that would normally go to a central lab would be done on site.
Yeah, I mean, they could become your customers if they buy your machines, of course. So, do you, I don't know if you can answer this or not. You can choose not to, but I'm always wondering, do you think that this is, it seems to me that this will be a huge target to a lot of the big labs. I mean, they would want to actually have this technology. Are you of the mindset that you would like to scale this and commercialize this and take it? Or do you feel that given the size of the company, how small, you probably have to partner with one of these, the bigger dogs, obviously, in the industry?
Um, it's a great question. I think for us, we're just focused on building, the best possible product and keeping the patient in sort of like the forefront of everything that we do. We want to see the product get out there. And so whatever path that takes, that's the path that it takes. But for us, it's really just about, building the best product and getting it into the marketplace.
This is really amazing. I guess before I let you go, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? I mean, first of all, congratulations on all of
Thank
the
you.
success. This is really a fascinating story, but I may have forgot to ask you something you would want to leave our listeners and viewers with. But so the floor is yours. Feel free to share anything.
No, I'd love to come back and, give you a demo, or if you're ever
Yes,
in the San Diego area, I invite you to stop by our facility and
would
try
love
out
to.
the tech. I would love to get your feedback in person on the technology. One thing that people do ask me about a lot is, well, what about capillary blood samples? Because the work that we're doing primarily with FDA is actually from a venipuncture sample,
Hmm.
and it's this
Hmm.
size tube. It's the 4 mil venipuncture tube. Even though we only need 300 microliters, as I told you, this is the smallest commercially available venipuncture tube. So that is what we use to collect the blood samples because this is the least sort of burdensome path forward. But we developed the technology, with capillary samples in mind. And one of the things that we're very focused on is to expand our claims once we get cleared to include capillary samples. And that will really help the reach of the product over time. When there is no phlebotomist on staff or not available, you could use capillary samples and get the same quality of results back.
Congratulations. I think you are doing amazing. I can't wait to see this in person. Definitely will definitely have to visit the
Great.
lab and be there. I really appreciate you coming on the show,
Thank you,
Dina, and I
Shadi. Thanks
look
for having
forward
me
to
today.
staying in touch and to following your journey. And
Thank you so much.